Welcome to Iceland Supernatural. My name is Valur Grettisson. I'm an editor-in-chief at Reykjavík Grapevine. And in this episode, we're going to talk about monsters. We have driven here way to the west of Westfjords. This town here down low is Bíldudalur, and we're visiting this place because there have been spotted a lot of monsters around this town. There is a wonderful museum there called the Sea Monster Museum, or Skrimslasetrið, where they actually have, there are testimonies by people that have seen the monsters, and it's a wonderful museum. Also, the monsters in Iceland is an odd chapter actually when it comes to folklore in Iceland. It's different from the rest of them, and we have a lot of monsters, but not that much written down. Also, interesting thing is that you can just see like the vastness of this ocean below me, and this is of course the North Atlantic Ocean in Arnarfjörður, which is the fjord here, and you can believe it that like if there is a monster anywhere on Earth, it could actually be there. Monsters are a little bit different when it comes to the Icelandic folklore. It's like, it's not uncommon that Icelanders say like we believe in elves. I mean, we don't believe in elves, but if you would ask an Icelander, do you think that elves do not exist? They will definitely tell you, well, perhaps they exist, but I don't really believe in them. We will not like eject the idea. But when it comes to monsters, and those that believe in monsters, or have been hunting even monsters, that's a very different thing. It's even like the bad, it's considered as being odd or something bad, or like you're a weirdo even if you like believe in monsters, or even describe that you have seen monsters. Still, we have like a lot of encounters with monsters in Iceland, and it's interesting also when you go to the sagas, like the folklores. There are not many like written stories about these monsters, while there are a lot of them about the elves, for example, and more. The monsters in Iceland are like, they're mostly, of course, they're in the ocean, but they're also on land. Some monsters are both on land and live in the ocean. The most the most common story that has been told about monsters in Iceland is about Nikur. Nikur is like a kelpie in Scotland. It's like a water horse. It's an odd being. It's like their hoofs are upside down. No, well, not upside down. They go backwards, and they're always gray in the colors. They can like shapeshift often. It's not said specifically in the Icelandic folklore how they shapeshift. Like if they shapeshift, they don't shapeshift into people, but they appear to be able to shapeshift into other animals, for example. Also interesting that they're always trying to lure people on their back. And when you do, they will go straight into the ocean with you, and you will of course drown and never be seen again. What they do with the remains is we don't really know. These stories can be quite grim. For example, one of the stories is about five children were actually playing outside, and they saw this very kind horse, and they tried to go on back of it, and the horse allowed them to do so. In the end, all of them except one child got on the back of the horse, and at the moment the horse took them all to this watery grave. The fifth child actually went home and told this story to their parents. So 4 children in a very small community like in Iceland is devastating. So it's interesting that this is how it was, of course. Also, we have like other monsters. For example, the kraken or kráki, like we call it in Icelandic. These are like huge monsters. One of the like most famous monsters in Iceland is the worm in Lagarfljót, and that worm is pretty unique when it comes to Icelandic folklore, because it's very different, but it's very similar, for example, to the Loch Ness monster. This monster is like, the story goes that a woman actually had like a very small worm and a golden ring, and she believed if she would put this worm on this golden ring, that would end up like the gold would multiply. But when she checked on the worm like a few days or weeks later, she saw that the gold hadn't multiplied, but the worm was much bigger. So she panicked. What she did then is that she took both the gold and the worm and she threw it straight into the lake. And then we have the Lagerfellsormur, which is now like believed to be very, very big, very frightening, and there are many tales of sightings of this worm. So here at Bíldudalur, there are a lot of monsters that have people have seen. The interesting thing is like the youngest example of this, or youngest sighting, is from 2010, sorry. So at 2010, they saw, a lot of people saw what they call seahorse. You see it perhaps here. It's called faxaskrimsli in English. It's very similar to the Chinese dragon, and as you can see, they have like this big green eye. The translation, seahorse, is not the same as like a nekur, like the kelpe, like I explained at the beginning. And because the translation is not accurate. The translation goes with like the hair on the back of the animal, and then it's like skrimsli. Fax is like back of a horse. Not sure what the English word about this is. And this animal was seen by a lot of people, and they are actually, the sightings and the testimonies about this is to be found at this museum. Other sighting was actually the shell monster, or skeljaskrimslið. And this monster is like a hippopotamus. It's like very similar to a hippopotamus. And this animal was like it's big. It was sighted at 1951, and there was many people that actually saw this monster. It's covered with seashells, and when it walks, it clings in it like all the time, so you can hear it also quite well. Of course, it's interesting to think about it, that these monsters are roaming around here, and they are quite big also. These monsters also live in the ocean, so it's easy for them to hide, of course. And the ocean is such a big part of Vestfirðir that, of course, I mean, if you look into the deep, it's like you can imagine. But although these monsters are huge, and everybody have now a phone in their, like a camera in their pocket, none have ever captured them on a photo and make this believable or just prove their existence. But of course, then it wouldn't be folklore anymore, right? There are a lot of animals or monsters that are in the ocean, of course. We have this traditional, like very well-known stories about the mermaids, of course. The mermaids are very similar to other cultures. It's like they have golden hair. They are like the upper body is like a woman, and the bottom half is of course like a fish. Their only purpose is when it comes to like hurting people, and they only live in the like far north of Iceland, which is close to Grímsey. They try to drown the sailors, and the trick is basically do not sleep while you're in the ocean, on the ocean as you're sailing, and like it's obviously a cautionary tale. Do not be lazy, or do not like sleep like whenever and so on. Bad things could happen. But this animal here, or monster, as you will call it, is a merman. And mermens in Iceland, that's a much more common stories when it comes to folklores. For example, they live on the bottom of the ocean, and they have even animals like sea cows. And these sea cows are, if they find a sea cow, for example, on the beaches of Iceland, you need to catch it, because it's very good when it comes to milking or breeding. So, but the only thing is, it's not that easy though, because they have like a bladder on their throat, perhaps to breathe in the ocean. And what happened is that you have to pop that bladder, and if you manage to do so, the cow will be yours. But it's not that easy, because it's quite a wild ride often for the farmer to try this. But mermen, we have a lot of stories about these creatures. They are sometimes described like this, but not always. Often they are exactly like people, and they are said to be almost like a close relatives of the elves. But one of these stories happened in Vogar, close to the volcano. The sailor was out hunting or fishing when he caught something heavy, and he dragged it up and dragged it up. Finally, he managed to drag it on board of his boat. That was a man, and he thought it was a drowned sailor, actually, because sailors were often drowning around Iceland at this time. But he saw that this creature was alive. So he realized quite quickly that this must have been a merman. So he asked him, like, are you a merman? And the merman answered, yes, I live on the bottom of the ocean. And he asked him, what were you doing when I catched you? And he explained to him that he was actually fixing the roof of his mother's house. It's an odd detail, actually, in the story, but I mean, it feels like there's Icelanders saw it like there was a society almost, like on the bottom of the ocean. Another interesting thing is that the merman actually asked him immediately, can you release me? And the sailor said, no, I have to take you back to land. And then the merman completely shut down. He didn't want to talk to him or anything. So the sailor sailed back, and the merman sat there quite disappointed because he was caught and he didn't know how his fate was going to be. So they were walking back on land, and he was forcing this merman to walk with him. And when this happened, then the dog of the sailors came, and the sailor's dog came, and he was very glad and sincere about it, and he was greeting him. But the sailor, he actually struck the dog quite harshly, and then the merman actually left. But the sailor definitely thought this was odd, so he looked at the merman, but he didn't ask anything of it because he knew that the merman wouldn't even answer him anymore. So they hiked a little bit further, and then the sailor actually fell down when he went because of a tussock on the ground. And he cursed the tussock in the only way the sailor can curse, and in a very brutal way. And then the merman left again, and the sailor was becoming very curious about this. In the end, he came to his farm, and the wife of this sailor, she greeted him very warmly, and the sailor was very glad and kissed his wife, and he came back and he was alive. And then the merman left again, and for the third time. And then the sailor asked the merman, now you have left 3 times. I don't understand, why have you done this? And the merman said, well, I'll tell you, and I explain it to you, but you have to release me at the exact same place as you caught me if I do so. And the sailor, he refused in the beginning, but he was way too curious to let this go. So he said, okay, I'll get you back into the ocean. So the merman explained, the first time I laughed at you was because when the dog came to you, he greeted you with sincerity, but you still struck it. When you cursed at the tussock, you didn't know that it's full of gold. And when you kissed your wife, and when you were happy how warmly she greeted you, you didn't know that she is false and she's having affairs. The sailor, of course, quite shocked, said, none of this is true, it can't be. And the merman said, well, it's pretty easy to find out the truth. And he encouraged him, well, go and check if there is gold in the tussock. So the sailor went there, he found a lot of gold. And he figured out, well, the merman must have been telling the truth. So he sailed back with the merman, and he let him go back into the ocean. It isn't stated in the story what happened between him and his wife, but my guess is that they got divorced, or even worse, like it was often in Iceland at the time. There are some very odd hybrid monsters even in Iceland. We have, for example, the Urðarköttur, and we have Skoffín, a very famous kind of a monster in Iceland, as well as the shadow Baldur or Skuggabaldur. The Skoffín is interesting. It's very similar actually to the shadow Baldur. It's like a smaller, cat-like almost animal, and it's said that a gaze alone could kill you. The only way to fight a monster like that is to use a mirror. The thing is also with these monsters is, for example, the Skoffín is like a spawn of an egg that a rooster actually hatches, and therefore this one egg that the rooster is supposed to lay it will become this Skoffín kind of a monster. So if you find these eggs, you have to destroy it very quickly. If you don't, they will become Skoffín. And Skoffín is also, like, for example, used for like if you're like very ugly, you're like a monster-like in looks, and so on. It's not a good word to actually tell to anyone. Shadow Baldur or Skuggabaldur, he is very interesting because he is the spawn of a cat and a fox. And it's interesting in the sense that he is almost exactly like the Skoffín, just not as ugly. The difference, and the same is, for example, with the gays. And these animals, like, they're distantly relative to, for example, werewolves. It's like you cannot kill these animals in any way except with this mirror, of course, or a silver bullet or a silver knife. It has to be silver in it to kill it. So the Shadow Baldur he is in many places in Iceland, in Vestfirðir, in the north of Iceland often, as well as the south. It's like where the monsters hang out in the past. These monsters are also like interesting in a way. Example, Shadow Baldur is because he is said to be quite dangerous when it comes to animals. But often these animals do not attack people unprovoked. The thing is, of course, with the Skuggabaldur, is that when you actually find him, you have to kill him. And there is a story about Skuggabaldur. We just call it "Tell the cat that I'm dead." That's the name of the story that we gave it. It's not the name of the story in the book. And this story goes like this. There was a farmer in Bollastaðir. Bollastaðir is just the name of the farm. And he went with a group of men. They found this Skuggabaldur and they used silver knives or knives to kill it. It was quite the battle. You have to be careful, of course, not to look in its eyes so you won't die instantly. And when they managed to corner the animal, this farmer came and he stabbed it. The moment that the animal was dying, or this monster, he actually whispered to the farmer, "Do me one favor. When I'm dead, tell the cat at Bollastaðir, your farm, that I am dead. That the Skuggabaldur is dead." The farmer definitely thought this was odd. He never even knew that these animals could speak. So he went back and he was in the same night telling his family this heroic tale of how he killed this Skuggabaldur. But the thing is that he didn't notice that the cat was actually listening also. It was sitting there like the house cat that everybody had at this time. And in the end of the story, he said and then there was this odd sentence that this animal told me. He said, "Tell the cat at Bollastaðir that I am dead." So the moment this line was spoken, the cat immediately attacked the farmer, bit him in the throat, and locked his claws also in his throat. This was very violent, and the people at the farm they tried to get the animal off the cat, but they didn't manage to because it was so strong and fierce. It wasn't until they literally ripped the head off the cat that it loosened its grip. But it was all too late. The farmer at Bollastaðir was actually he was stone dead. But the thing is, they think that the theory in the story is basically that the cat was actually the father of this monster. It's quite a unique museum, in my opinion, because there is no museum in Iceland that have actually gathered all the testimonies of Icelanders that have encountered monsters. Some of these encounters was actually here in this area. We're not. It's very like all monster sighting. It's very unclear what it is, or like nobody got a picture of it or nothing like that. But the people that are telling these stories are like these are not some like people that believe in the supernatural. These are like great, like salt of the earth kind of people. They are like, these are sailors or farmers and such, and they are not superstitious. But these people are often quite like convinced that they have seen these tracks of a monster or encountered something in the ocean, because there are few as much in the ocean, like on the ocean sailing, as the sailors in the Westfjords. To be honest, it's like when you look at just the frightening deep of the ocean here, the North Atlantic Ocean in the close to Bíldudalur in the Westfjords, it's not that far off to imagine that something big, something odd, or something that we haven't discovered yet is still living there. So this is, of course, the end of our Supernatural Iceland today, and more will come. We want to tell you more about the folklores, and I just want to encourage you to like and subscribe, of course. It would really help us and help other people just to find us better on YouTube and so on. So thanks for watching, and until next time.